Okay. So we have started talking about Moses, and this is Moses part 2. So last week we said we were talking about Moses, but Moses was actually like the most minor character in the story we were talking about. Hannah, yeah, politics. Yes, politics indeed. But, it is important. We won't be talking about any specific politicians. We'll be talking more about the kind of what politics looked like in Paul's time, and kind of his opinion on politics, kind of, how Christianity and politics have played together historically, and kind of what it means to, be a Christian and to think about politics, but also know that ultimately God is in control. So those are the kinds of things we'll be talking about when we talk about the politics lesson. But anyway, Moses. So last week we talked about how, all the Hebrews were in Egypt because they moved there because of that famine during Joseph's time. And now it's been 400 years later. So 400 years, many generations, there are lots of Hebrews. There are so many Hebrews that Pharaoh is getting a bit nervous. He thinks there are too many Hebrews. And instead of making a grand plan to help assimilate the Hebrews better or to become better friends, he decides the best way is to oppress them more. And when that doesn't work, he decides the best plan is to kill all the male babies, which, as we're going to see, doesn't go well for him. And the Israelites were not very happy about it. So one woman, Jochebed, saved her baby by putting him in a basket in the river. And then Pharaoh's daughter pulled him out of the river, and she raised him as her own, even though she knew he was a Hebrew baby. So now we're going to skip forward. There aren't really any stories in the Bible. There are none about Moses as a child or anything like that. It basically is like Moses is a baby. He's raised as an Egyptian. Fast forward to Moses as an adult. So we're going to turn in our Bibles to Exodus 2:11 through 15. Exodus 2:11 through 15. So one day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" He answered, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses, I left out part of the verse. My apologies. That is not the end of the verse. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. I accidentally left that part out because it's the start of a new paragraph. And so when I copied and pasted it over, it just kind of didn't make it. My bad. So Moses is grown and he goes out to the Hebrews. It says his people, which makes it seem like he knew he was a Hebrew. Now, we've talked about last week movie adaptions, and if you tuned in before we started, I was playing the music from The Prince of Egypt. Movie adaptions like to play that the revelation of Moses' ancestry was a huge shock to him, whether it's Prince of Egypt or the Ten Commandments, that he didn't know till he was adult. He kind of didn't know till right before this moment. We don't know if that's true or not. We don't know if Pharaoh's daughter raised him with knowledge of his ancestry, if Jochebed was telling him since he was a baby he was a Hebrew and that he was kind of in this privileged secret position, or if it was something that came to a shock to him. The reason why movies play it as a shock right before here is because that's better drama for the story, and since they can take, poetic license, right? And since it's not clear, they can kind of go either way. But it's possible he knew from a very young age. All we do know is that when Moses goes out and he sees the Egyptian beating a Hebrew, at this point, Moses seems to already know he is a Hebrew by birth. So Moses goes out to see these people who are his people. And they're not different from him, ethnically, biologically, anything like that, other than by chance. right? This is the life Moses would have had if he had been allowed to be raised as a Hebrew, right? The other option is he would have just been killed. So in another life, he could be one of these slaves. So he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he can't take it. And he kills the Egyptians. He kills the Egyptian. There's just one. Hannah says she has to go now, but has a prayer request. She has a bruised bone on her right foot so that it would heal in no time. There's no pain except when I jump on point, so that I can do these things too. I'm not allowed to for a week. Yeah, it's hard in ballet when you're injured. We will pray for you, Hannah. Bye. Good luck. All right. So, back to where we were. I lost my place. Sorry. So he kills the Egyptian. But he does it very carefully. He doesn't just like kill him like in a moment of rage. He says he looks this way and he looks that. He doesn't want anyone to know before he kills this dude. In almost all of the movie adaptions, they never have that bit where he's like, is anybody around? No one's going to see me kill this dude. Okay. In the movie adaptions, it's always like a fit of rage. He just murders the dude. But here it seems like he looks around. He has a moment to think before he kills this dude. And that's because he doesn't want anyone to know he's done it. Not necessarily because he knows killing anyone is against God's law. He may or may not know that. But he definitely knows it's against Pharaoh's law. Pharaoh would frown very much on Egyptians killing Egyptians. And Pharaoh would view Moses as an Egyptian. I mean, I'm sure Pharaoh knew that, by birth, Moses was a Hebrew, but he had been raised as an Egyptian, allowed in the house of Pharaoh. You can't just go around murdering people. So Moses doesn't want anyone to know he did it. But the next day he goes out and he sees two Hebrews, his people, fighting each other. And he's basically like, isn't life hard enough without you guys beating each other up? But the Hebrews are like, dude, we don't want your opinion. The Hebrews probably don't know Moses is a Hebrew. He would seem like an Egyptian to them. But even if they knew he was a Hebrew, they don't want his opinion. They know it turns out he's a murderer. They're like, you're a murderer? What right do you have to have an opinion on our fight? At least we're not killing each other. So that freaks Moses out. And somehow word spreads from there. And Pharaoh also finds out. And Pharaoh is mad. Once again, killing an Egyptian against the law, even if you're an adopted son of his daughter. So Pharaoh wants Moses to pay the penalty, which, could be up to death. But obviously Moses doesn't want to die. So he flees and he ends up in a place called Midian. All right. So the next section we're going to look at is Exodus 2:16 through 22. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien residing in a foreign land." All right. So, in Midian, Moses basically meets a priest and his daughters. When he is sitting at the well, the daughters arrive at the well. So Moses is at the well. The daughters arrive at the well to water their father's flock, and they're basically bullied by some male shepherds. But Moses defends them. So they are very appreciative, and they can kind of see that he has nothing, he's just like wandering and is here. So they take him home and introduce him to their dad. And basically Moses decides to stay there, and he's like, I'm going to be a Midianite forever. This seems like a great place. It's not Egypt. You guys got a nice gig going on here. So I'm just going to stay here. So he marries one of the guy's daughter. Her name is Zipporah. They have a kid. Moses, at this point, he has no intention of going back to Egypt. He's like, this is a good life. I can be a shepherd. It's low pressure. Not a lot of, Pharaoh going on. There's no Hebrews versus Egyptians. I can just be a Midianite. Because why would he want to go back to Egypt? He's wanted for murder there. So, sure, he's abandoned, his people of origin who are suffering. A people that he surely felt for at one point, because that's the whole reason he killed the Egyptian, was to defend a Hebrew. But now Moses seems determined to put all of that behind him. He's like, my own life is in danger. I'm not going back there. I'm not risking my neck for these guys. So, I've got a good and decent life here in Midian, while his people are suffering. Moses is doing okay. And that's kind of the story of Moses' life up to this point, right? His people are suffering. He's a prince of Egypt. His people are suffering. He's a shepherd in Midian. He's just like, I'm doing okay. Who cares? Who cares? I'm okay. It's a very self-centered point of view. All right, moving on. Exodus 2:23 through 25. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. So Moses may have forgotten about his people, but God has not. And if you look at these verses, you can be like, had God forgotten about them up to this point? It's like God remembered his covenant. Like, what's the whole point of this whole 400 years? We don't know God's mind. We can't read God's mind. But we know that God would not have forgotten. It's not like he misplaced the Hebrews, right? He knew they were there, and he had promised them a deliverer. And this is all going to work out in the end. All right, so Exodus 3:1 through 3. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and see why the bush is not burned up. Okay, so Moses, chilling in Midian, living his life, being a shepherd. He's out one day with his flock, and he sees something crazy. There's a bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up, right? That's weird, right? If you set a piece of paper on fire, it like shrivels to ash beneath where the fire is, right? That's why in the wax, it melts, the candles. But this one is not burning up. And Moses is like, that's pretty crazy. I should check that out. Look, there are two kinds of people in the world. There's people who see a burning bush and they think I should check this out. And there are people who are like, that is haunted. I am leaving. I'm not going to advise you as to what kind of person you should be. Look, if the house is haunted, please leave. In this Halloween season, do not be the person in the haunted house who's like, what was that sound in the basement? But in this scenario, worked out for Moses, right? All right. He's going to check out the burning bush. It's not haunted. It's God. Exodus 3:4 through 6. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So the burning bush already has Moses' attention, but then it really gets his attention when God's voice comes out of it. Not only does God's voice come out of it, but it calls him by name. It says his name, Moses. So, Moses doesn't know this is God at this point. He's just like, this burning bush is saying my name. I'd be like, it's haunted and get out of there. But Moses is like, what? And he zeroes in on the bush. I would presume if you heard God's voice, you wouldn't think it was haunted. You would know. But, all right. So God tells Moses to remove his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. Why? We don't remove our sandals when we go to church. This wasn't even something later required of priests in the Old Testament when they entered the temple and were in the presence of God. This is not a requirement for entering the presence of God to remove your sandals. So why is it required here? I don't know, guys. I looked at some commentaries and they didn't have a very good answer either. It's hypothesized that maybe it was a standard tradition of that time period to do before going before a superior person. Or it's possible that God was just trying to instill in Moses that this is a special moment. Moses isn't entering a temple. There is no building. This isn't the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple. If you were entering the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple, and we're going to talk about this more when we get to the actual temple, there's a process. There's a purification process to help you get in the right mindset. So you are thinking, correctly before you enter into God's presence. But Moses just kind of stumbled accidentally upon God. I mean, it wasn't an accident. It was God's plan. But from Moses' perspective, it was kind of an accident. Well, he's just doing his job in the middle of wilderness and he stumbles into God's presence. But God's presence is holy no matter where we encounter it, whether it's in the temple, whether it's in church, whether it's on the street, at school, or in the middle of the wilderness. So maybe God wanted Moses to do something to recognize the holiness of this moment, to help Moses get into the right frame of mind and to realize the seriousness of this conversation. So in order to do that, God is like, please take your shoes off so you can have a weird moment where you're like, oh, this is like a big deal. All right, so God then explains to Moses that he is the God of Moses' people. And because of this, Moses hides his face, afraid to look at him. This makes me wonder a couple of things. One, does Moses know a little bit about the Hebrew God? Would he recognize the names? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Did Jochebed teach him those stories when he was small and she was his basically nurse? Because he had been raised mostly as an Egyptian. But even as an Egyptian, maybe he heard some of these stories. Or, like I said, maybe Jochebed taught him this. It's also possible that covering your face is something that Egyptians would do if they came to face with their gods. Regardless, Moses realized he was talking to someone of the utmost awesomeness and importance, and that this deserved a little humility and respect. Also, Moses was probably terrified out of his mind. So, you may be thinking right now, I mean, most of you guys know the story, but I'm sure Moses is thinking right now, why is God talking to a runaway murderer, former prince of Egypt, who has basically just let go of all of his responsibilities, both as a prince of Egypt and a Hebrew? Well, the next verses will explain that. All right. Exodus 3:7-10. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So God has come to Moses with a mission. Not just any mission. No. God wants Moses to go back to Egypt, where Moses is a wanted criminal, and somehow free all the slaves under the rule of the Egyptians, who, let's mind you, Egypt is the superpower of the ancient world. And then God wants him to take those people and travel across the known world with them to the land promised to Abraham, Canaan, which is currently inhabited by other people who don't want the Hebrews to come take their land. Yeah, I'm sure at this point Moses is just like, what? So the Egyptians aren't going to be happy to see their free labor go away. They're not going to be happy to see Moses come back, Moses the murderer. The people who live in Canaan are not going to be happy to see these Hebrews show up and be like, oh yeah, our like great grandfather was promised his land by God. So you got to move now. So, but back to the Egyptians and seeing their free labor go away. Historically, this sort of thing does not go well. Slavery often ends in bloody revolutions. And even that takes a long, slow time. I mean, we had our own bloody war in America about the end of slavery. Even today, there are still slaves in this world. It is hard for people who own slaves, who are getting free labor, to let them go. So for Moses to just show up and be like, hey, we should stop slavery now, and you should free all these people and let them follow me. That's not usually how these things go. Usually there needs to be some sort of revolution, a war, or some sort of other government that comes in and says you have to stop this. But in this case, what we actually have is divine intervention, right? So God's plan for divine intervention happens to involve Moses. Sorry, that's how they say it in the Ten Commandments. So how do we think Moses feels about this? This is a huge responsibility. Moses, who has basically run away from all responsibility. All right, let's see. Exodus 3:11 through 15. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the peoples out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is my title for all generations. Moses doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to do this. He gives God excuse after excuse on why he can't do it. First, he's like, God, I am not qualified to do this. And God's like, dude, your qualifications don't matter. The only qualifications that matter are my qualifications, and I'm God. Does that satisfy Moses? No. No, he's like, but if I go, who will I say sent me when they ask your name? God has an answer for that too. And we're going to come back to that because it's a whole other discussion. Because Moses doesn't stop with the excuses there. If you keep reading, his next excuse is going to be, but suppose they do not believe me or listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you. Basically, he's saying, God, what if they think I'm insane? And God has an answer for that too. He changes Moses' staff into a serpent and is like, basically show them this trick and they'll see the power I have given you. But it keeps going. Moses has even more excuses. Exodus 4:10 through 13. But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Then the Lord said to him, who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak. But he said, Oh my Lord, please send someone else. So Moses is like, God, I'm not good at talking. You can't send someone like me. I'm so bad at talking. I'm just going to fumble all the words. And just, no, I can't do this. And God's like, I will give you the words to say, Moses. I am God. I will give you the perfect words to say. And Moses is still like, don't send me, God. Please. I don't want to do this. Moses is literally talking to God. He's literally talking back to God. He has literally been given a divine mission from God. And he doesn't want to do it. So, often in life, people are like, if God just told me what to do, I'd do it. If he would just send me a sign or tell me what to do, then I would do that because there'd be no questions if it was just clear. We're a bunch of liars. That's what I'm saying. Moses is a prime example that sometimes God can be super clear about what he wants us to do. And we don't want to do it because it's too hard. We don't want to go to Egypt. We don't want to have to talk to people. Life in Midian is good. Moses has a wife and kids and a family. His life is simple and easy. His biggest responsibility is to some sheep. But God doesn't always call us to do simple and easy things in life. Sometimes he tells us to go back to the land where we are wanted for murder and go anger the most powerful guy in the whole world by telling him you're taking all of his slaves and leaving. Sometimes what God asks us to do is really hard. And sometimes we feel like we're not the best person for the job. Sometimes we think, God can't want me to be a pastor. I'm not good at talking. Or God can't really mean for me to help homeless strangers. I'm an introvert who doesn't like meeting new people. Or even, God can't mean me to move to a land where being Christian is illegal to spread the word. I could die. That's not safe. But sometimes God really means for us to do those things. Just like Moses. In the end, Moses does agree to go. There's a lot of arguing with God. He gathers his family and he goes back to Egypt. And we'll see what happens when he gets there next week. But for now, I want to back up a little and talk about this name of God thing. So we're going to go back to Exodus 3:14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. When Moses asked the question of God's name, he was probably looking for an easy answer. He was probably looking for oh yeah, tell them my name is Bob. In the ancient Egyptian religion, which Moses would have been very familiar with, he would have been raised in, every god had a name. You had Horus, you have Set, you have Osiris, you have Isis, you have tons of gods. But God doesn't give Moses a name. He says, I am who I am. God's answer is basically to state his existence. I am who I am. My Jewish commentary says this could also translate to be, I will be what I will be, meaning my nature will become evident from my actions. This can also be seen when God says many times how people will know him as Lord because of the wondrous things he will do. God is always like, you will know who I am because of what I've done. He's basically saying the proof is in the pudding. You'll see that I'm God because it'll become very evident real fast. My Christian commentary also says it can be translated to, I cause to be because I cause to be, which is a statement of creation that God is then indicating he created everything. He creates and sustains the world. That is his name. His name is, I create and sustain the world. And that name reveals it all. So why are there so many translations for what seems to be pretty standard? It's because state of being verbs are weird. In English, our state of being verbs are I am, you are, he is, they are. Or in the past tense, I was, you were, he was, they were. When you say I am, you usually follow it up with an adjective or a statement of who you are. I am happy. I am Mandy. I am hungry. He was cool. You're making a statement about your state of existence. I currently exist in a happy state. I currently exist as Mandy. I exist in a hungry state. He existed in a cool state. God says, I am. He is what? He is everything. Creation is his signature. Everything is from God. God's name is that he exists. He is. Now in Judaism, this phrase, I am who I am, is roughly translated to the name Yahweh. And this is considered a very sacred name in Judaism that they often will not say. They take that not saying God's name in vain very seriously, and they won't even say God's name even lightly. This is why in your Bible, you'll often see Lord in all caps. Whenever you say Lord in all caps, it's actually using God's name, Yahweh, but it's not translated that way. It's translated as Lord in all caps. So in Christian history, you'll hear people refer to God as Jehovah. That is a mistranslation of Yahweh that's really just kind of stuck around. It's not wrong to use. I mean, I think God knows what we mean when we use the name Jehovah, but it is a mistranslation. Most of you might know that name from Indiana Jones. In the Latin, Jehovah starts with an I. That's because in Latin there are no J's. Julius Caesar is actually Julius Caesar. That's neither here nor there. God says his name is Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. And that pronunciation may be terrible in Hebrew. I will be what I will be. I am who I am. I caused to be because I caused to be. All right, so now we're going to flip forward in the Bible. We're going to flip to the Gospel of John. John is the fourth gospel, which makes it the fourth book of the New Testament. So before we read it, a few things. In this section, Jesus is talking to Jewish religious leaders in what was probably the temple courtyard. These Jewish leaders are not happy. They're never happy with Jesus. They're not happy with what Jesus has been saying or doing. And as per usual, they are trying to trap him into saying something wrong. And Jesus had just been talking about God and Abraham. All right, so John 8:57 through 59. Then the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am." So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So Jesus has been talking about Abraham as if he knew Abraham, as if he's seen him. That's how Jesus is talking about Abraham. And the Jewish leaders are like, "You're not even 50. Abraham lived like 2,000 years ago. You don't know Abraham. Stop talking like you do." And Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am. I am." That should sound familiar. In that sentence right there, Jesus is claiming to be God. Before Abraham was, 2,000 years ago, before Abraham existed, Jesus existed. But he's not just saying that. If you just wanted to say you were alive before Abraham, you'd say before Abraham was, I was. That's the correct English translation. Correct grammar. You would say before my little sister was born, I was born. But that's not what Jesus says. The Gospel of John is written in Greek. The words he uses are ego eimi, which translates to that present case existence. I am. Before Abraham was, I am. You'll hear people say that Jesus never directly claimed to be God. And to a certain extent, that's kind of true, because he never straight up said the words, I am God. He said things like, the Father and I are one. But even here, the words are Greek. He didn't call himself Yahweh. He didn't say before Abraham was Yahweh. But he is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, claiming to be God right here. He is very clearly calling to the meaning of Yahweh and the name God gave himself when talking to Moses. And if the grammar isn't proof enough, the Jewish leaders' reaction to him is they pick up stones to stone him, to kill him. They're furious at him and this is in accordance with Jewish law. If we look at Leviticus 24:16, one who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. The whole congregation shall stone the blasphemer. Aliens as well as citizens, when they blaspheme the name, shall be put to death. Anyone who says something blasphemous is to be put to death. And this thing that Jesus just said, claiming to be God, claiming to be I am, that's literally the most blasphemous thing you can do. If I go around being like, yeah, I'm God, Guys, I'm not God. That also like brings God down to my level of mandiness, and that is not cool. So Jesus basically just told them he is God. And these Jewish leaders are like, how dare you? How dare you claim to be God? And this is not the only time Jesus says something like this. Pastor Doug likes to call them, these I am statements. They're all over the Gospel of John. Our God doesn't have a name. Our God is. He exists. His name is not Bob. Jesus has a name. And Jesus lays claim to that existence. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus is God. And right here, he says it. And this is part of why studying the Old Testament is so important. This is why we study the Old Testament. Without that context, without knowing who Abraham is, God's chosen father of his people, without knowing the conversation between Moses and God, you might be able to infer that Jesus is claiming to be immortal. If he was before Abraham, he's just claiming to be 2,000 years old, right? But it's hard to see it in its full depth. But these Jewish leaders Jesus was talking about would have spent their whole lives reading and studying and arguing about the Old Testament. And they knew exactly what he was saying. And Jesus knew what he was saying. And now we also know what Jesus was saying. We know Jesus is saying he was the very same God who spoke to Moses in that burning bush. So, 2 weeks from now, we will come back and continue the story of Moses with him coming back to Egypt. And we're going to see the crazy shenanigans that happen. But next week, like I said, we will be on Zoom talking about Christianity and politics. So be sure to tune in for that next week.